When I was a kid, my mum worked as a teacher, and she got very close to a co-worker of hers who had a son around my age, and of whom I, as well, was very close. When my mum or her friend would head out for the night, the other would take care of both of us kids. And basically, it meant I spent half my time over there, and my friend spent half his time at my house, which was perfect and fun for us. We lived in different cities, but since that kind of system had been going on pretty much since forever, I grew up knowing my friend's city just as well as mine. His mum was well aware of that, so that being said, whenever we were going on a walk in their area, she'd let us wander around because she knew we'd always find our way back to her. My mum, though, was more cautious and always kept an eye on us as she'd walk behind us to make sure she was always able to see us. I just wish her friend would have done the same. One day, I had to be around 6 or 7. We were going on a walk with my friend Marcus and his mum Katie. It was a very sunny day, and I was wearing a dress with embroidered flowers, and I had my long blonde hair down. I often heard I was a pretty kid, even from strangers in the street, and besides making me and my parents somewhat uncomfortable, nothing bad ever happened. During that walk, Katie was walking ahead of us, and I was chatting and just fooling around with Marcus, when he suddenly remembered something urgent to tell his mum, as urgent as something can be for an 8-year-old boy. He ran up to her and left me strolling behind for a couple of minutes, just the same as it had happened 100 times prior. That time though, we were circling around a big campsite, and we walked by white vans and camping cars. One of those vans had its back doors open, and there was a man, probably in his mid-40s, smoking a cigarette and leaning on the vehicle. He locked eyes with me as I was approaching, then saw that Katie and Marcus weren't paying much attention to me, as they were already a couple of meters ahead. Then, he proceeded to pull me by my arm close to him, and so I found myself with my body touching his. So weirded out that I didn't even say a word, although I knew Katie would have heard me if I called for help. He leaned towards me as he was obviously much taller than I was, muttering something I didn't get, and he winked at me and kissed me on the lips, and then pulled me to the open doors of his van. At this point, if he had pushed me just a little, I would have fell in the truck. At this point, I was too scared to even lift a finger, and even though I didn't understand everything that was going on, I knew it wasn't okay. He put his hands on the door as to close the vehicle, and I felt my heart sink. At that exact moment, some other man jogged towards us, in his 40s as well, waving hello to me and saying something along the lines of, "I lost sight of you for a bit." I was so scared. He had a very kindly look on his face and was staring at me with great insistence, with a huge reassuring smile. And the van man awkwardly laughed and yanked me out of the way of the car, slamming the door shut. I ran to Katie as I heard the van go off and just acted as if nothing had happened. To this day, I never told that story to anyone, not to Katie or Marcus, not to my mum, nobody. I'm 22 years old today. So, to the friendly guy, who obviously didn't lose sight of me or whatever, but just probably saw everything and wanted to interfere, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. To the pedophile who surely would have abducted me, and who was strangely okay with kissing a kid in public and in broad daylight, I'm not even in the mood to add anything to what happened, but everyone thinks the same thing as I do, and I wish you hell, and let's not ever meet again. Although I think I'd be too old for you. I come from a chaotic upbringing. I was born and raised as a child in South Korea. I later moved to Australia with my mother, having lost my father in a homicide. The next few years of my life in Australia were difficult. Meeting and making friends was difficult in the early noughties, particularly since I was quite nerdy and did not speak much English, something most Australian kids at the time did not relate well to. One of my scariest memories from when I was age 12, at the time, it did not even occur to me just how close I came to potentially losing my life. My mother and I were on a road trip, heading south from Melbourne to stay on the southern coast. We had stopped one evening at a small, well-kept caravan park. The caravan park was quaint and beautiful, neat grass, nice flowers, and a small creek which ran along the edge of the premises. It reminded me of home. I spent some time walking around on my own as my mother was taking a nap. I discovered a game and pool room. I went inside and spent probably a good few hours playing pool by myself and generally just mucking around when a young boy came in. I was very shy and so was he, but we eventually talked for a little while and became friendly. I do not remember playing any games with him, but I do recall him being pretty nervous. He kept asking me if I wanted to go back to his caravan, as his parents were making dinner. At first, I was not interested and said no. We spent some more time doing things and talking. As it got later, he became more pushy and asked if I liked cake and lollies. Of course, I said. That much I do remember clearly. I followed him to his caravan, which was much older than ours and quite dilapidated. He asked me to wait outside while he talked to his parents. I waited patiently for a few minutes until the door opened, and a large older man with glasses and no shirt opened the door and asked if I would like to come inside for cake. I was scared, but I remember feeling like I had to, like it would be rude of me to leave. As I was walking in the door, I heard a man behind me shout, "Hey, what's going on here?" I was quickly grabbed by the collar of my dress and pulled inside. The man then quickly tried to lock the door behind me. However, the stranger was too quick and burst in the door. He took my hand abruptly and pulled me outside, and we frantically ran away. The man asked which unit or room or caravan I was in and took me straight there. We went inside and my mum yelled at him, asking why I was there. I was hiding in the corner, crying while he explained what happened. We packed back up that night and left immediately. I was already heavily on anxiety medication after what happened back home, and we never spoke about it alone again. My mother claimed it was something I should talk to my therapist about. Every time we all spoke about it, my mother would leave the room. It scared the hell out of her, and I didn't really understand why. I guess at that age, it's difficult for the brain to comprehend the reality or potential of the situation. Looking back on it now, it utterly scares me to the point of losing sleep. For some background, I'm female, and when this took place, I was 13 or 14 years old. My family moved to a semi-posh, small housing development when I was in 8th grade. At the time, there were maybe 12 other homes in the development. Soon after moving in, my parents made friends with our next-door neighbors, James and Margaret. They were only slightly younger than my parents, I'd guess mid-30s, and had no children. When asked why they hadn't had any children yet, James said something along the lines of, "I'm waiting to get my ducks in a row." They were super nice, friendly, and fun to be around. Sometimes my parents would leave my little sister and me with them while they would go out. They had a huge house and tons of movies to watch, and cable, which we didn't have. At first, I really enjoyed hanging out with James. I thought he was funny and really easy to talk to. He spoke to me like he would to an adult, like we were friends. I could talk to him about school or vent about how strict my parents were. For months, things were totally normal. Then, very slowly, things started to change. I started to gradually feel more and more uncomfortable around James. He would say little things that I felt were slightly suggestive, and sometimes he would hug me for too long. At first, I just ignored it and assumed I was probably being paranoid. We continued to be friends with James and Margaret. We'd have dinner with them. Sometimes Margaret would invite me over to bake with her. One night, James gave me a fake earring and said it would be really funny if I put it on my belly button to scare my mum. I actually agreed. I thought it would be hilarious. My mum is really, really conservative. I went to put it on my belly button, and he said it would be even funnier if you put it on your nipple instead. Do you think it would fit? And he tried to lift up my shirt. That was when I knew I wasn't paranoid, and that this man was not my friend. Clearly, I should have immediately told my parents, but teenage me was not that smart. I was really embarrassed by the situation, and for some reason, felt like I'd just make everyone mad at me if I said anything. So from that point on, I just made up any excuse not to be around James. If he and Margaret came to our house, I'd stay in my room the whole time. If my family went to their house, I'd say I had homework, or just wanted to stay home by myself. My parents just figured I was being a typical antisocial teenager. For a while, nothing happened. Then James started calling my house every time my parents went out and I was at home. He'd ask for my dad or mum, but then would try to casually strike up a conversation with me. I'd brush him off and tell him I'd let my parents know he called. One night, I was home alone and he called. He said he was bored and asked if I wanted to come over and watch a movie. I said I had homework. Another night, he called and asked if he could swing by and pick up some movies that he had let my parents borrow. I felt like I didn't have a valid excuse for why he couldn't take back his own movies, so I said okay. He said he'd come get them in a few minutes. I very quickly grabbed the movies and put them on my front porch, then went back inside and locked the doors. He rang the bell, but I ignored him. He must have said something to my mum about it because she asked me why I didn't give them to him, why I didn't answer the door. I told her my music must have been too loud and didn't hear it. I came up with excuse after excuse and still said nothing, all the while growing to truly hate James. One night, while home alone, I was cleaning my room. My bedroom is on the side of the house that faces James and Margaret's house, on the second floor. I was just listening to some music and cleaning near the window. I glanced up, and there was James, standing in front of his kitchen sliding glass door, staring up at me. He was fully naked and doing things. At the time, young and uninformed me didn't actually know what he was doing. All I knew was that James was definitely naked and definitely watching me and definitely grabbing himself. I quickly slammed down the shade and turned off my light. I was so upset that I hid in my closet. A few nights later, my best friend was spending the night. I had told her about what had happened, and she actually kind of laughed in disbelief. She said I must have imagined it. No way was he standing there naked. She believed me later that night when we were hanging out in my room, and she suddenly darted into my closet and screamed, "He's there, and he's in his birthday suit." From that point on, I actually kept that shade duct taped shut so no one would make the mistake of leaving it up. That was the last thing that ever happened. I didn't say anything because I was so embarrassed and afraid. After that, he and Margaret even started being distant from my parents. We didn't get invited over anymore. They didn't call. My parents would occasionally talk and wonder what happened. They couldn't understand why James and Margaret would just stop being friends with them. Still, I said nothing. Looking back, I think James probably panicked when he realized that both me and my friend had seen him, that it would be two people's word against his. Over the years, James and Margaret's coldness eventually turned into hostility. They would complain and argue with my parents over trivial neighbor stuff. We didn't mow our lawns often enough. Our trees were slightly over the property line. Our cats were coming into their yard, etc. One night over dinner, my mum was venting about it and said, "I don't understand what happened. They were our friends, and now they basically hate us. What could we have possibly done to offend them so badly?" I couldn't take it anymore. I just blurted it out. James was a pervert and was harassing me. I told them every single thing that happened, and it all just fell into place, and they understood and totally believed me. Obviously, they were livid, and my dad wanted to march over to their house immediately and confront James. However, over 5 years had passed. I was an adult at this point, and aside from not wanting to have anything to do with him, I had no proof. James and Margaret still live next door to my parents. Sometimes when I go to their house to visit, he's outside working on his lawn. I never wave or smile as I drive by, but sometimes I lock eyes with him. Although he never had to deal with any consequences, I still feel like I won in the end. I came out totally unscathed, but he's still a pervert, and he still has to live with that. I still remember this happening so vividly. It was terrifying to the point that I had to move rooms as I was too scared to sleep in my original one. So here is the story. The houses in this suburb were back to back, so basically there was a street, a line of houses, a fence sectioning them off, another line of houses, and then their street. The backyards were what connected each other, so you could basically climb your backyard fence and land in your neighbor's backyard. It's important to understand the layout. In my house, towards the back of the house was the laundry, and then my room, a large glass door leading outside. It had windows on the side, which sat on a concrete side passage that connected the front of the house to the backyard. My bed was pushed against the wall with the window above and next to it. 9-year-old me was a night owl. As a young kid, I used to pretend to go to sleep and wait for the all clear, then turn on the lamp and read my books. This particular night, it was windy, so you could hear the dry leaves blowing up and down the side passage. It was around midnight when I heard the leaves shifting and moving around outside a lot quicker than before. Assuming the wind had picked up, I kept reading. The noise was growing louder and louder, and it seemed to stop right by my window. The house is an older house, and it's on stilts, so my window would have been about 2 to 3 feet off the ground. I heard a bang against the wall, then a scraping noise. I froze sitting in bed as that noise came from right behind me. I panicked as the scraping noise was more and more frequent, and I turned off the lamp and did what every child would do in that situation. I retreated under the covers and hid while listening. My heart was pounding. I can still feel the fear to this day. The noise stopped, and I heard the crunching on the leaves as whatever it was walking away. I was trying to gather the courage to run to my parents' room, which was right at the front of the house, because that meant I had to walk past the glass door. Then I heard a thump upstairs to the back door, then the glamoring of the wind chimes. They were metal and hung low. Whoever it was could not see in the dark, and must have knocked them as they were peering in the door. I heard them grab it and throw them to the ground. This was followed by tapping and scratching, and they even tried the door handle. I screamed to high heaven, hoping Dad would wake up. I heard the person clamber away. I got up and ran to my parents' room, woke up Dad in a panic, declaring someone is outside. He took off with a baseball bat and no pants like the knight in shining armor he was. I don't know how long it was, but he came back and told me he could not find anybody and I should go back to bed. I refused and slept in the lounge room that night. It got to a point where I was so unsettled, my parents had to shift all rooms around to move me from that room. It was only years later, when I was 20, and we were at a family dinner talking about things we did when we were young. I brought up that story. My dad turns to me and says, "Since we don't live there anymore, I guess I can tell you that I did find someone that night." He found our neighbor, Bill, whom was the father of one of my friends from school. He was trying to climb over the fence when Dad caught him, and the first thing he said to my dad was, "Oh, did someone make her scream?" Dad refused to tell me what happened after that, but that line chills me to this day. He found his ladder on its side near my window in the morning, which of course he did not tell me about either, as the creep was trying to climb into my room. I'm female, and when I was about 9 years old, my family used to live in a remote area on the outskirts of town. Considering the location of the suburb, that area was surrounded by warehouses and such. At the time, my family did not have a phone in the house, and neither did our neighbors. There were no cell phones back then, or they were a luxury, and not everyone could afford one. This took place at the end of the 90s. So, if I needed to call my mum whilst she was at work, I had to either go to my dad's work or a company next to his, which was closer, to make a phone call. My dad's work was a relatively short walk from our house, probably 30 minutes or less. My dad was working at a huge unloading dock for natural resource shipments. In order to get to my dad's work, I had to walk past another adjacent company, just like the one my dad was working. I'll call it Docks 2. My dad's work, as well as Docks 2, had a sort of watchtower. It was just a cabin mounted at the top of a tall platform, and you need to go up a decent amount of stairs to get to the top, and there was always a guard inside overseeing the whole yard from the top during the day and night to make sure no one is in danger and no break-ins. The phones were located only inside watchtowers at the time. Docks 2 were much closer to our house, about 10 minutes walk. One day, as I've done many times before, I went to Docks 2 to make a phone call. I climbed the stairs, knocked on the door, and was welcomed by a guard I used to see quite often and knew well. However, that day he wasn't alone. A new guy, 28 at the time, was there. Apparently, he was a new employee hired to work shifts. He was this very tanned white guy, always wearing military-style outfits. I was just an average-looking child, looking exactly my age. My hair was very blonde, which made my cheeks always appear rosy red and give me an even more childish appearance. When the new guy saw me that day, he wouldn't take his eyes off me. As soon as I was about to finish my call with my mum, it's just one room so everyone can hear my conversation with her, the new guy went outside to smoke. When I came out, he smiled and asked me what my name is, and whether I came there often to make calls. I don't remember what I said, but I felt very shy because he was just staring deeply into my eyes. I will call him the creep. Fast forward, and I came to that tower again to make a call, and there he was again, but that time he was alone. I spoke to my mum, and I was about to leave. He asked me if I wanted any tea, to which I refused. He then proceeded to ask how my school was going and things like that. He offered to help me with my homework. However, I told him I've got it all sorted. Harmless, but strange. On a side note, I just wanted to say that what gave me shivers when I was near him is that whenever he looked at me, he looked drunk, which was so unsettling. Mind you, he wasn't actually drunk, but his eyes would get so hazy and his face would flush red. Sometime later, I saw him again. That time, I was walking to my dad's work with my friend, and he was doing some digging in docks too, when he saw me through the metal fence that was separating us. He just leaned against his shovel and started staring at me. He didn't say hi or anything like that. After those encounters, for quite some time, I took alternative routes to see my dad, or play with puppies at my dad's work, or make calls to my mum, because he really creeped me out. However, one day, I had to call my mum urgently. My dad's work phone didn't work, so I had to go to the Docks 2 tower, hoping I won't see him. The creep was there, and oh boy, he was happy I came. He was complaining how I didn't come anymore to see him. As I was making a call, he grabbed another chair and sat right next to me, very close. It took a while for the call, because my mum was busy with something, and someone went to get her whilst I was on the line. It felt like hours waiting, and the creep was just sitting next to me, looking at me and smiling. When my mum finally got to the phone, he got up and went to make me tea, and brought some biscuits. When I was done talking, he insisted I have some tea with him. I didn't, and he just kept trying to strike a conversation, but this time the tone of the conversation was different. He asked me how old exactly I was. I told him 12 or 13. I have no idea why I lied that I was older than 9. He told me his age, and although I knew he was much older, I felt really weirded out that he wanted to talk to me so badly, or had any interest in being my friend. My alarms did go off every time I was around him, but I guess I didn't feel overly in danger. He then proceeded to tell me that I was beautiful, and asked me whether I had a boyfriend. He asked me if I had already dated boys, and what type of boys I liked. I was so uncomfortable and so eager to leave at that point, but he would just keep dragging me into these weird conversations. I couldn't tell if he was drinking that day. When I began moving towards the door, he followed me. Eventually we both were outside. However, in order to get down from the tower, you need to walk this narrow path towards the stairs. He stood blocking it so that I couldn't leave. He got very close to me, and I freaked out. The only escape tactic I could come up with as a child was to pretend I'm seeing someone from the top of the tower. So I began waving my hand at the road, down the bottom, and towards houses in the distance, pretending I see someone I know and saying, "Oh look, that's my uncle. He's waving at me." The creep looked in that direction, but either didn't care or could tell that I was lying. I kept on telling him that my uncle who waved back is a big angry man, and if I won't come down this instance and go home, we both are going to be in trouble. The creep didn't budge. He got even closer and eventually pressed me against the railing. He kept on asking me his weird questions whilst I was terrified to move, because I didn't want to move my body against his, if that makes any sense, so I just froze. He asked me if I would come on a date with him, and that he's looking for a girlfriend. And at that particular moment, someone was coming up the stairs to the tower, so he let me go, but asked me to come back. I had not told anyone about this encounter at that stage, because I was afraid that my parents would get angry. I also felt very embarrassed and thought that people would judge me for what happened. Sometime later, I was home and it was around 9 p.m. I know the time because it was my bedtime. Suddenly, a car came into our driveway. I came to see who it was through the front room window, and I could see it was the creep, but this time with other guys blasting music in his car and shouting my name. I have no idea how he knew where I lived. He must have followed me one day. My dad was outraged. He asked me who these people were, but before I could even answer, he rushed outside. Apparently, the creep asked for me to go out with him and his friends. My dad obviously refused, saying that I'm a child and too young to hang out with them or go out at this time of night, and that if he sees any one of them ever again, he'll beat the living daylights out of them. So stupid. I think because we lived so far away from everything, I was really keen to make friends as there were no kids around as such. For a while after that, I haven't seen the creep or heard of him. A significant time later, I was walking to my dad's work again, and I had completely forgotten about the creep. He was working in the docks too with his friends, and maybe the same ones that came with him that night in the car, or maybe these were just his co-workers. I got scared when I saw him, and even thought he shouted hi. I pretended not to know him. He said something to his friends, and I remember so clearly how one of his friends exclaimed loudly, "Her?" I guess he told them about me, or his interest in me, but no one expected me to be a child. I looked at the guy that exclaimed. He was staring at me in utter disbelief. He must have been 20 to 25 or so, I think, and the creep was saying something to him. His friends screamed at him, "Have you lost your mind?" Clearly, the creep didn't see me as a child like everyone else did. Fast forward again, maybe half a year. One day I was home alone in the evening, waiting for my parents to come back from work. We lived in a very safe community, so sometimes I'd be home by myself for a little bit after school, till my parents got home. I was playing a game whereby I was the singer. I had this stage created in my living room, and I was performing in front of chairs, pretending chairs were my live audience. It was pitch black outside. At some point during my performance, I see someone staring at me through the living room window. That person must have been crouching down, as only the top of the face could be seen from the bottom of the window. As soon as that person realized I saw them, they ran away. I was so embarrassed that someone saw me performing, scared and shocked at the same time, that I was literally glued to the floor. I don't know whether that was him. Our dog didn't react at all, maybe because music was playing very loud. I was scared to go outside the house to check, but peered through the window. However, there was no one there. That person had to climb over a wooden fence to get to our living room window. I told my parents about it. I'd also asked my friend whether it was him who came round, but he said it wasn't him. I don't know if my friend felt shy to admit he was watching me, or whether it was the creep. So to finish this up, one day I went to Docks 2 with my dad, as my dad needed something from there for work. I saw the old guard that I knew well, and asked about the creep, and was told that he doesn't work there anymore. I don't know what happened to him, and I've never told my parents what's happened. So, even though I know our paths will never cross, let's not meet. In 2013, I used to have a best friend who we'll call Sadie for this story. Sadie was 5 years older than me, but had a late birthday. We used to frequently have sleepovers at her house, and often go to the gas station near her house to get snacks for the night. One summer night, I can't remember the time exactly, but I remember it was still pretty light out. Sadie and I were returning from the gas station with snacks in hand. We live in one of the most dangerous cities in British Columbia, and it's pretty hilly in some areas. Her area in particular was super hilly, so hilly to the point that when you're crossing the street, you can hear the car coming up the street before you can see it. We were about 2 houses away from her place as we were crossing the street. I remember being halfway in the street as a red truck came hightailing towards us. Lucky Sadie and her long legs had already made it across the street and swiftly pulled me out of the road before I could have been hit. Immediately after, Sadie and I both looked up at the top of the hill to see where the truck had gone. The driver had made a U-turn and was just sat at the top of the hill, idling. Sadie, being a quick thinker, grabbed my wrist and ran as fast as she could possibly make me. We started barreling towards her house, which was now 1 house away. I remember peering back at the top of the hill and seeing the truck beginning to turn in the direction we were running, just a street over. We crossed the last street before making it back to Sadie's, and as we crossed, I looked back up the street to see if the truck was following us. It was already speeding for the next street over, because I guess they assumed we didn't live close by. Luckily, she and I safely made it back to her house. However, we never actually got to get a glimpse of what the driver looked like, or matter of fact, their gender. And since they were driving so quickly and erratically, we couldn't see their license plate. We never told her parents or called the police because of those reasons, and also partly because we were both understandably shaken by the whole thing. I forgot about this situation until today. It disturbs me so much to think, what did they intend on doing? So to the person in the red pickup truck, please let's not ever meet again. I thought I would share with you something that happened to me 4 years ago now that still sits heavy on my conscience. I'm happy to say that most people in this country go their entire lives without encountering some of the monsters that exist in this otherwise beautiful place. Unfortunately, I've not been so fortunate. Before I start, I would like to bore you with some backstory. I've been working as an IT systems administrator for a few years now, and have met many people who I occasionally moonlight as a repairwoman for. And yes, I do pay tax. Over the years, friends have told friends, and I occasionally get messages and phone calls from strangers asking for basic computer repairs for cheaper than they could otherwise find locally. For years now, I have been overly cautious with people, places, and objects that don't feel right. I have learned to always trust my gut instinct and to err on the side of caution. This story, however, is the one and only time that I ignored that instinct. Around 4 years ago, I was contacted over text message by a local man. He was direct and straight to the point. The conversation was pretty basic. He asked me if I could look at his computer, as he had heard about me from a friend. I said yes, and he explained the issue he was having. The PC had suddenly stopped booting. Occasionally, he could manage to get it running, but it would operate incredibly slowly and crash quickly. I told the man that I would need to inspect the PC myself, however it sounded like a textbook hard drive failure. I asked the unknown man to call me to discuss an option, and where he could bring the PC to for me to look at. His response was, "No phone calls. Where can I drop it off and when? I need the things off it as soon as possible." This seemed sketchy to me at first. Most people like to talk over the phone about the issues they're having and try to sort them remotely, and at the very least, know how much it was going to cost. I eventually brushed it off, thinking maybe he was just well off and was looking for a fast turnaround, which he knew only a hobbyist would be able to achieve in this area. I discussed a time where he could drop the PC off at my work, and asked what time he would like to do that. He did not reply. The next morning, at the front of my work, there was a PC on the ground, with a post-it note crudely marked with my name in black felt tip marker. My boss was not super impressed, as our business has quite strict security, and members of the public are not usually allowed onto the premises after hours. I was ultimately very confused, however. I never got a reply from this man, and as far as I knew, he had done a runner. By now, I'm convinced this guy had some sort of social anxiety, a refusal to talk on the phone, and deliberately dropped the PC off without a word of warning before our business even opened its doors to its workers. And this is not a client-based business, this is an office block. Again, alarm bells are kind of ringing at this stage. However, there was no reason for me to really worry. It's not as if he seemed on edge or dangerous, and not that I could really tell in a few text messages we had sent each other. I proceeded as planned, ran diagnostic tools, confirmed it was a dead hard drive, removed the drive and replaced it with a pre-purchased one, reinstalled the OS, and proceeded to start the recovery process. For those of you not familiar with the process, here is the basic rundown. Pull out the old hard drive, plug it into a working PC, either directly or with a dock, create a virtual clone of the drive, and then perform the recovery using specialized software on the clone, not the actual hard drive, as it may fail during the process. I did this with good results and managed to recover pretty much everything. I copied all his files over to his new drive, reinstalled the applications I could see he had, and sent the computer on its merry way. Later that day, I sent the man a message stating that his computer was fixed, and he could come pick it up sometime during business hours. He responded a few hours later, saying that he was not going to be available until after work. Okay, I thought, that's fair enough. He's probably working too. At first, the man asked if he could meet me at my house after work the following day, which by this stage was definitely too weird. Obviously, I declined and insisted on meeting him at the local post office at around 6 p.m. By this stage, I was kind of getting some pretty bad heebie-jeebies. I decided to have a friend come with me, just in case things got weird. I have a male friend at work who was happy to come with. We arrive at the post office a little early and sit on the small park bench out the front. About 15 minutes pass and the guy finally arrives. By this stage it's getting pretty dark. Thinking back now, I'm pretty sure he delayed it as much as he could. The man walks up to us slowly in a kind of predatory way, creeping forward as to make as little noise as possible, even though we knew he was there. His grey jeans stained with what looked like white paint, wearing a dark hoodie covering his head. All we can see of his face is the protruding long grey tattered beard. The man stands in front of us for a while. I introduce myself and my friend. The man does not react at all. Instead, seemingly looking me up and down for what felt like minutes. I could smell his breath from where I was standing, and his silence was only broken by the sound of his nose hairs whistling as he breathed. I eventually try and speak to him about his PC, stating that it was in fact a dead hard drive. However, before I could finish speaking, he interrupts me mid-sentence with a raspy voice, the kind of voice that makes you feel a tingle on the back of your throat. "Is that the computer?" I respond, "Yes. Did you get everything back?" The man quickly responded, in more of a statement rather than a question. "Yes, I told you in the message." In a quick and angry voice, he then asked me, "Did you go through any of it?" "Of course not." "Are you sure?" At this point, I was getting really weirded out, and my friend could tell I felt threatened. I did not deal well with older men, and he knew it. He swiftly responded with, "Look man, the computer's fixed and you have your data back. Do you want it or not?" I looked at my friend, then back at the man. He looked me up and down one last time, thrusted some notes into my hand, quickly grabbed the PC, and swiftly but silently walked away to the car park. We got back in the car, and I soon realized the man had paid me $400 for a simple repair. We never discussed the price, as that usually happens early in the discussion, or as they return for their computer, but usually this would only cost around $150. I was shocked and very happy. My friend was not so happy. Something was very, very off with that man, and now I'm even more convinced. Did you notice how intent he was on you not going through his data? I agreed. Something weird was going on. Although I'm not supposed to, and doing so is kind of a breach of privacy, my itch to know what he was paranoid about was strong. The next day at work, having been bugged by my friend, I finally decided to take a look at the contents of the clone's drive. I noticed pretty quickly that it was quite large, around 250 gig, for what was essentially a Windows install and some basic applications, photos and a few downloads. It can be tricky trying to find what is taking up so much space sometimes, but using a tool like Space Sniffer can really help. I booted the program up and quickly found a zip file hidden in his Windows folder under a very long tree of folders. Inside these folders were empty folders, and some had empty documents in them. Others were completely empty. I jumped straight to the zip file and opened it. Luckily, not password protected. What I found inside made me feel sick. Even more so, given what I had been through in my life. Thousands and thousands of images and videos of children, some suggestive, others more. I opened 3 or 4 photos and immediately felt lightheaded and sick. I quickly closed the zip folder, shocked. Oddly enough, it did not settle in until sometime later what I had found. All I was thinking about before that was what would happen if a colleague saw those images in the building. Little did occur to me what kind of threat this man was and what now lay on my desk. I told my friend, who told me to call the police ASAP. I did, and was asked to not touch the images further and to come into the station to make a report with my friend. They later confiscated the hard drive I had copied the clone to, and I never got it back. I was told by police a week or so later that the phone number the man used to send me the text message was a web-based application, and the phone number was fake. However, they had identified the man thanks to the metadata stored on the hard drive clone, and that the man probably did not realize a copy was made of his drive in the process of the recovery. They also told me that the man was being looked for, however, his last known residency was in a different state. The police believed he was staying somewhere without a lease, with a friend, or simply squatting, as he had since skipped town. It has been 4 years now, and I've heard nothing. I'm still paranoid he's going to come to my office building again, or follow me home. I have surrounded my house with self-defense items just in case, and my home feels safe now. However, work, not so much. Like I said earlier, most people go through life without ever seeing the scum of society. I have experienced it myself 3 times now, and I am done. Never, ever again. So please, creepy man with the most spine-chilling raspy voice I have ever heard, please do not come to my workplace. You almost cost me my job, and the thought of what you might have done in the past, or what you might do in the future, haunts me to this day. Please, let's not meet again. I have 3 children. My middle child, my son, is the sweetest thing. He is compassionate and empathetic, which at his age, 3, is rare. When we go out in public, people take notice, especially if it's just him and me. He will talk your head off and has impeccable manners. It was during a last-minute shopping trip this takes place. One child was in school, the other was with my mum, so he and I had some time alone. I always treasure these trips because I get to experience his beautiful personality unfiltered. We go to the store, get what we need out of the food section, then head to the toiletries. He is happy just talking away, mostly about things relevant to him in his 3-year-old mind, telling me he's a superhero, having to save a princess, asking to pick up something special for his brother and sister. All around, a cute kid. We go down the oral hygiene aisle to pick up some toothpaste. As we are leaving the aisle, I notice a man and woman together. I'm assuming they are married. The woman continues onto the aisle, whereas the man stops close to where my son and I were, and just sort of stares. I figure he was listening to our conversation, as most people do. Seriously, the kid talks a lot. It didn't freak me out, but just made me more alert. So this guy, without prompting, says to me, "He's cute. Can I have him?" I was weirded out, but said, "No, I love my boy. I think I'll keep him." Well, that's too bad. I'm thinking that's going to be the end of our exchange. I tried giving him the benefit of the doubt and assuming he was joking, and didn't realize it was creepy. At this point, my son sees a Batman toothbrush he must have. I explained to him, yes, it is the most amazing toothbrush ever, but I just don't have the money to buy another one right now. Being 3, he was obviously upset, end of the world type stuff. So the man completely bypasses me and comes up to my son. "What about this one? Do you like this one? If you lived with me, I'd get it for you." Now I'm completely freaked out. Who ignores the mother to talk to the child, offering him something he can't have? What did he expect? My son to say in front of me that he wants to go with the man, and I let him? It was just super weird, him coming at my son like that. I gave him the full effect of my "touch my kid and I'll stab you" face. He sort of backs off, but doesn't go to join his wife. I'm super cautious when it comes to my kids, because my aunt was murdered by a serial killer. It has left this aura of fear, despair, and paranoia in my family, making something big out of something small. But I knew this was big. At this point, I'm like, screw this, and noped our asses out of there. This guy very cautiously starts to follow us, going into an aisle when we were heading out. He was trying very hard to be nonchalant, staying a good ways behind us as to not arouse suspicion, but being hyper-aware for the reasons above, I took notice. So I go down the aisles I had already been down, then going again. He followed us everywhere. What was he trying to do? Kidnap my kid in the middle of a crowded supermarket? After this dance of ours, I decided to head to the bathroom and hide out for a while. What do you know? He heads to the men's room. I get into the restroom and block the door with my body, meaning someone would have to knock before coming in because they couldn't open the door. I figured if he tried to force his way in, I'd have a head start. I decided if he was still there when we got out, I would alert security. I could have handled him if he decided to make his move, since I practice Muay Thai, but I really try not to use it if I can help it, because it's such a brutal art form. My son and I chill out in the bathroom for about 45 minutes, sort of awkwardly. I give him my phone to play a game, while thinking of what my next move is, and all the horrible things this guy could have planned for my son. All the while thinking, what was this guy's end game? Abduct a kid in broad daylight? He had to know he would get caught because I would make a huge fuss. The store would go on lockdown. Did he want to get arrested? Does he think he could get away with it? Was he tweaked out on drugs? Mentally ill? So many questions without answers. This ends anticlimactically because when we left, the guy was long gone. I just think how lucky we were that nothing happened, or that this guy wasn't more patient. I have no doubt in my mind I would have murdered someone for trying to take my kid. So, supermarket creeper, if we meet again, you're gonna get shanked. So a short backstory. My older brother worked for his now ex-girlfriend's dad as a janitor. He was 19, I recently turned 17. His girlfriend was in my class and asked her dad to hire me. This job was a contracted job, so we would go to this business and clean their bathrooms, cafeterias, kitchenettes, and take out cubicle trash. There were about 4 different buildings all belonging to this one business, so I rarely saw my brother, who was constantly at the main building. Eventually, I was moved to the main building where my brother and I worked together. I made sure to be an annoying little sister at times, so he didn't like to work in the same area with me, but we would work with our co-workers in the bigger areas together, like the cafeteria. One of our co-workers was around 45, and her son was a grade younger than me. I'll call her Lisa. We were the only 2 working at another building together before moving to the main building. When we had breaks, she would offer me a cigarette every now and then. I always accepted as I smoked prior, but had quit when my dad found them and made me throw them out. Now the story begins. There was a man, about 58 years old, who worked at the main building in the production area. I'll call him Bob. There were only 2 bathrooms, a small office and a trash compactor, so I rarely went there. The production area and the main hallway to go outside was connected by the cafeteria. One day while we were cleaning the cafeteria, I was vacuuming the rugs when Bob came up from behind me and poked my sides. This obviously scared me, as my brother was in front of me cleaning the counters. He started laughing about how high I jumped from randomly being touched. I turned around and it was Bob. He was laughing as well. I thought it was odd, but since my brother was laughing, I brushed it off. I can't remember exactly how it all started, but I think that was it. Bob kept badgering me about friending him on Facebook. I kept saying that I forgot and would add him that night, but never did, until I eventually got annoyed and just added him. He would text me every weekend asking how I was and what I was doing and when the next day I worked would be. I didn't see anything wrong at first, so I replied. Bob would go on smoke breaks with Lisa. I would join them because they would offer me cigs, and I couldn't buy them anymore out of fear that my dad would find them. Nothing out of the ordinary happened on our smoke breaks. We would small talk about our days and such. Lisa had a boyfriend, and things were pretty rough between them. This all happened in the span of a year, so the timeline is a bit blurry. At one point, Lisa stopped going on smoke breaks with me and Bob. I learned Bob's break schedule and would stop working just to go out and smoke with him. By this point, I was addicted to cigs again. I didn't tell Bob, but I only talked with him so that he would give me free smokes. Lisa's boyfriend started working with us. He asked me if Bob was my boyfriend or my dad, because the relationship between us was hard to tell because of how close we were. Bob would say things to me like, "I'm basically your dad, we get along so well." He once said I looked like his 20-something daughter, and that people here think we're father and daughter. But the worst thing he said was, someone asked if we were dating or related, and I told him it's none of your business. I had a boyfriend that he knew about, so that upset me a lot. I didn't try to correct him, because I was afraid that my free cigs would stop. When winter came round, we would smoke in Bob's car. He always started his car so we would have heat, but a few times he put the car in drive and drove around the parking lot. I didn't panic, but I made sure I had an escape plan. Plus, my brother would know where I was and would get worried if I never returned. Bob also called everyone pet names like Honey, Princess and such, so I never thought anything of it when he called me them. He once even commented on my profile picture, "Very beautiful, Princess." As in Bob's mind, he was my father figure. He also thought that Lisa was my mother figure. I have great, loving parents at home, so I never looked for any other adult as parental figures. He would tell Lisa and me that he wanted to take us out to eat, and we could drink at his apartment afterwards. Basically a family night. We would mention that it could be fun, but never went into further detail about it since we both knew we wouldn't be going. Bob would tell me about his life and how lonely he was. He confessed to me his undying love for Lisa and said things like, "I can give her a much better life than her boyfriend, and if she would just give me a chance, I can make her happy." Lisa cut all contact with him and he was heartbroken. I told my parents about Bob and they agreed that he was acting very odd. I asked them to talk to my older brother as I thought that he should have said something to Bob, telling him to leave me alone. He would always laugh when Bob scared me, so I pushed off the creepy vibes for months. Once I made a mistake of trying to joke. A man passed us at the smoke pit and asked if I was Bob's daughter. I said, "Might as well be." Big mistake. After this, Bob started giving me side hugs and even kissed me on the top of my head, less often than the hugs. It even got to the point of him telling me he loves me. He would walk beside me and take my phone out of my back pocket, then compliment me on how fast I reacted, saying, "I'd never grab your butt. I just wanted to see what you would do." A new lady around 36 started working with Bob in production, and he forgot all about Lisa and focused on this new lady. She joined us on smoke breaks, and he would even drive her to the store after work since she didn't have a car. She also had a rough patch with her boyfriend, which made Bob complain the same way he did about Lisa. My older brother quit, and my younger brother took his place. He would join us at the smoke pit, but eventually stopped going because he didn't like smoking. I asked him what he thought of Bob. He said Bob was extremely creepy. I agreed. On Halloween, the new lady and I both dressed up. Bob took pictures on his phone. He even made our picture his lock screen. I just thought that he was using me as a way to have a picture of her, and he wanted her on his lock screen, not me. When the new lady stopped working at the business, Bob was heartbroken again. He told me that he tried to keep in touch with her, but she blocked him with no warning. He turned back to Lisa. She would sometimes smoke with us, but not nearly as much as she did before. When we went down the hall, he would make sexual jokes to her. From what she told me, he made jokes about me too, not nearly as sexual, so I never caught on. She stopped talking to him again. I told my boss and co-workers that I was joining the Air Force soon and would quit a month before basic military training so I can enjoy time with my family. I mentioned this to Bob once. He acted like a proud father and gave me life advice that I didn't pay attention to. I had enough of him sexually harassing my co-worker and giving me the creeps. My boyfriend was also joining the Air Force and wanted me to quit my job sooner than I planned. 2 months before my scheduled BMT date, Bob brought up the dinner idea again, but this time without Lisa being invited. He said that we could watch movies in his apartment and he would buy me whatever alcohol I wanted. If I fell asleep, he would put me in his bed and he would sleep on the couch. I told him that my parents would never let me sleep at an older man's apartment and my boyfriend would be super upset. He told me to lie to them about where I was going. I declined. He also thought that when I was on leave, I would go to his work and surprise him. His logic was, I knew his work schedule. He honestly thought that we were so close that I would go out of my way with the limited time I had with my family while I was home just to go back where I used to work so I could smoke a cigarette with him for 10 minutes. Yeah, right. I complained to my parents again about Bob, and they told me to quit the next time I worked. They agreed to help pay for everything I wanted to do before BMT when the money I had saved ran out because they wanted me happy and out of Bob's life. It was 2 weeks before my boyfriend left for BMT, so quitting at that time would be perfect, so I could spend the next 2 weeks with him, which is what I did. I texted my boss and told him about Bob and how he makes sexual jokes to Lisa and how he made me uncomfortable. He said he never heard anything about it before, and I should have told him earlier. Since I was quitting and would no longer be in that building, he couldn't go to HR to complain. Bob texted me the night before I quit. I gave short, dull answers. He asked if everything was okay because I wasn't my usual self. Weeks before I stopped replying to him, because why would a girl spend her free time texting a creepy 58-year-old? I blocked him on Facebook that night. The next day, I went into work and was in the cafeteria taking out the trash. I saw Bob talking to Lisa, showing her something on his phone. He then came over to me. I quickly grabbed the large garbage bags so I could use them as an excuse to leave. He told me that he changed his lock screen because I was leaving soon. His exact words were, "Your eyes tell a story." It was my senior picture from almost a year ago. He had to scroll through my Facebook just to find it. I told him that it was nice and that I had to get on with work and walked away. The next day, I went back to return my badge and keys. I went to Lisa to ask her if she noticed how creepy Bob had been, since I thought I was the only one that noticed. I wasn't the only one. She went off about how he was sexually harassing her, and she laughed awkwardly to get away from it. She said, "Ever wonder why I stopped going out on smoke breaks with you guys?" I told her about his love for her. She was grossed out. She then said something that made my whole last year that I've been working there come together. "I think it was you all along." She thought that when Bob was complaining about his love for her, he was really talking about me. She showed me a text from him the night prior. "I didn't come into work today, blah blah blah, because it hurts that I can't text her anymore," and so on. My brother told me that Bob was out of work for 3 days before finally going back. I did unblock him for a day to see if our messages would still be there since they were gone when I blocked him, to show my boss, but they weren't. I still get a message from him apologizing if he upset me in any way, because Lisa told him that I quit because of him. He was asking if it was true. In his mind, I was like a daughter to him that unexpectedly blocked him and quit to get him out of my life. It still creeps me out to think about how this old man groomed me, from poking my sides to slowly leading up to hugging me, kissing my head and telling me he loves me and texting me every day. I wish I would have followed my gut instinct and stopped talking to him sooner, but I really wanted those damn cigarettes. I'm just happy that I had enough common sense to not go to his apartment and drink with him. He lived over the bar that my mum's friend works at. She told me that he showed her a picture of me once, telling her how proud he is of me joining the military.